Hello everyone, and welcome to part 15 of 66 Books, a series of 66 short overviews of all 66 books of our Bible. And we've reached the book of Ezra, the book of the restoration. It seems likely that Ezra and Nehemiah were originally a single book. Ezra has been referred to by many as the book of the restoration. It is a book that describes the return of the people, the rebuilding of the temple, and then the reform of the people. When thinking about the author, although he's not specifically mentioned as author, it is obvious that Ezra wrote the book of Ezra. A large portion of it are written in the first person from Ezra's point of view, and the clearness of the detail and the description favours an author who was an eyewitness, particularly of the later events in the book. Jewish tradition also attributes the authorship of the book to Ezra. Tradition also holds that Ezra was the founder of the great synagogue where the canon of the Old Testament were finally placed and curated under Nehemiah. There is a tradition that he collected the biblical books for the first time into a single unit and originated the synagogue form of worship. Ezra fits perfectly into the post-exile period of Israel's history. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem in repeated waves between 605 and 586 BC, taking the Jews into exile. In around October of 539 BC, Cyrus overthrew Babylon and issued his decree which allowed the Jews to return home in 538 BC. Zerubbabel then returned in 538 BC and was in Jerusalem by 516 BC. During Zerubbabel's time, we know that the prophets Haggai and Zechariah were ministering and prophesying, which was around 520 BC and later. Ezra then returns in 458 BC, and Nehemiah comes back in 445 BC. We'll find more out about that in the next book. It was the remnant who returned from Babylon that would receive this book. They were the ones who also experienced the events recorded in it. Ezra no doubt wrote this to remind them and succeeding generations of what God had done. The remnant didn't just return, they came back and they restored. And they restored to some degree the Israel of old. They rebuilt the temple and they began to reform the people again. Thus the subject of the book is restoration. The message of Ezra is God restores his people, he restores them to the place of worship and to a place of obedience. Though Ezra no doubt wrote the book, he was more of a compiler than an author, for this book is a compilation and not a single narrative. Furthermore, it should be noted that from halfway through chapter 4 to halfway through chapter 7 and the second half of chapter 8 are in Aramaic, not Hebrew. So the first part, the first 6 chapters of this book, describe the return and the rebuilding of the temple under Zerubbabel. The first 3 chapters show the decree of Cyrus and the return, and they tell the story of the census and the returnees. Then in 3 to 6 we see the commencement of the rebuilding of the temple. And then in the second half of the book, from chapter 7 through to the end of chapter 10, we have for us the return and the restoration of the people under Ezra, both beginning with the decree of Artaxerxes, then the return of Ezra. He makes a confession and confronts the people. The purpose of Ezra was simply to show that the Lord had fulfilled his promise that was announced by the prophets earlier, to return the people from Babylon, to rebuild the temple, to restore the temple worship according to the law, and to preserve the reassembled community of faith from the relapses that they'd had into idol worship. So to summarize this entire book in one phrase, Ezra simply wrote to the returning remnant after the end of the 70-year captivity to show them and others who would follow how God had the temple rebuilt in Jerusalem, and how God restored the people, and how God restored his community of faith to a place of worship and obedience.